Hey, you guys. Welcome back to Flickers of Fear, my own little movie review show. The movie I'm talking about today, this is one that I've been wanting to rewatch for a really long time. This is Crawlspace from 1986. Now, I remember first seeing this on cable, probably the late 80s, I kind of feel like, or maybe the very early 90s. And a lot of it didn't really stick with me, but for whatever reason, I don't know, just like the vibe of it kind of like stuck with me for a long time. And every time I kept seeing the poster come up, I'm like, oh, I should really rewatch that and, see if what I remembered about it was still accurate or whatever, because I didn't really remember too much about it other than Klaus Kinski. Obviously, he's very memorable, and it just being about somebody that's, stalking around in people's crawl space, obviously. So I saw that I had actually planned to do a different movie on this particular episode, but then when I was scrolling through, I was kind of like, I didn't have that much time to like watch something, and the one that I was gonna do, I looked at it and I'm like, oh my god, that's like more than 2.5 hours long, and I said I don't really have that kind of time commitment. So then I started going through like movies on Tubi, so I saw that Crawlspace was on there for free, and I was just kind of like, okay, well, this is about the time that I'm gonna pull the trigger on that. So I decided to watch it. Now this movie, I think I maybe only saw it once or twice, and I don't even remember if I sat through the whole entire thing like in one sitting the first time I saw it. Because I just remembered kind of like bits and pieces of it, and I didn't really know much about it. Like I said, the only thing I remembered about it was like that Klaus Kinski was like super creepy in it, which, it's Klaus Kinski, so of course he's creepy because he's creepy at everything, because he was just a creepy dude. So I didn't actually know a lot of the stuff that went on behind the scenes of this, because to be honest, this movie, I don't know if I would necessarily call it, like a forgotten classic or anything like that. It's not that fantastic. And honestly, if Klaus Kinski hadn't been in it, I think it probably just would have been like a fairly decent low to mid-tier 80s slasher movie, and it wouldn't really be all that well remembered. It would just be because there were so many of them that came out at the time. So Klaus Kinski being in this really kind of like elevated it to a whole other level and did something really kind of like unique with it. Now, this movie, I'll get into, the the behind the scenes stuff about this movie is, I'm going to say, like, more entertaining. And the movie is entertaining, I'm not saying that. But the stuff that went on behind the scenes is, like, way more entertaining than the actual movie itself. Not really. It's funny. You could laugh about it now in hindsight because it was a long time ago. But at the time that everybody was going through it, I'm sure it was really not a fun time for everybody that was working on this movie, other than Klaus Kinski. He seemed to... I don't know if he was having a fun time either, but he really did seem to relish kind of making life miserable for everybody else. But he wasn't really an actor, so I guess he got away with it for a very long time. So this movie was actually written and directed by David Schmoller. Now, he had done several movies in the past. Most notably, he had done Tourist Trap, which I will say unequivocally is actually a forgotten class. I don't think it's forgotten. I think most horror fans have seen it. I think they even remade it. I don't even remember when that was. But Tourist Trap is brilliant. We reviewed that like a long time ago, and I've always really liked that one. And so this is one that he did with Charles Band. So after this... David Schmoller would go on to work again with Charles Band, and he would do the first Puppet Master movie. So now David Schmoller, his original idea for this, I think that either the production company or the producers he was working with, they had been working on that movie Troll, which is nothing to do with the infamous So Bad It's Good movie Troll 2, which was just kind of like an Italian movie made with a bunch of Mormons that was not a sequel to anything, but there was actually a movie called Troll, and they had built this apartment house set to film that movie on. Now, because this set was still around, and it was a very, very nice like apartment house set, the production company wanted to make another movie in it based around an apartment house. So David Schmoller comes in. Now, he had been shopping around this screenplay that he had written, which was about a guy who was a Vietnam vet with PTSD, and when he comes home, his wife and kids have left, and he proceeds to build like kind of, I guess he was like a prisoner of war, and he proceeds to build like a replica of the, cage that he was kept in or whatever, like in the attic of the apartment building. So David Schmoller brings this to the production company, and they're like, well, the Vietnam War had really just, when they were talking about making this movie, it only ended just like 10 years ago. Or is America really ready to see a horror movie that's kind of based around the Vietnam War? Which is weird because House came out in 1986, and that was also kind of based around the Vietnam War, sort of, even though it was kind of more of a horror comedy. But apparently the production company is like, man, it's too soon. We don't want to really see anything about Vietnam like in a horror movie. How about Nazis? So David Schmoller was like, so you don't want to see something about Vietnam, but you're perfectly happy to make yet another Nazi horror movie. At which point the producers were kind of like, if you make this movie about Nazis, we will get you Klaus Kinski, who is a very bankable name, obviously. So he was like, okay, you got a deal. I'm going to make it about Nazis. David Schmoller, apparently, was very excited to work with Klaus Kinski because, like I said, a big star. He says that he did not know prior to filming this movie how much of a gigantic pain in the ass Klaus Kinski was to work with. And pain in the ass is a gigantic understatement. Klaus Kinski was legitimately certifiably insane, I think. I believe he actually did spend some time in a psychiatric ward when he was younger for psychopathy. He was legit insane and very, 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 very difficult. I mean, he was like a fucking nightmare to work with. I mean, you have to have been a nightmare to work with if more than one director has basically like threatened to kill you. So Klaus Kinski, I mean, probably most famously, like, he had a very long working relationship and a sort of friendship with Werner Herzog, who also did, the Nosferatu remake, which we reviewed also a while back. And Werner Herzog also threatened to kill him on at least one occasion and made a documentary about their relationship. There was a documentary about their relationship called My Best Fiend, which kind of showed, Klaus Kinski just like losing his mind. He was a lunatic. I mean, he was a lunatic. Brilliant actor, but a lunatic. So Klaus Kinski gets brought in to do this movie. Now, in this movie, he's playing, because they're sitting there, well, they're like, okay, well, Klaus Kinski, however old he was, when this movie was made, he was a little bit older. I believe he died of a heart attack only about 5 years after this movie came out. I think he died in 1991. So, but he was still too young to have been a Nazi. So they had to sort of, they kind of had to massage the script to make it that like his dad was a Nazi and he had been, Hitler Youth or whatever. And then he was just kind of, and his dad was like a war criminal and he was almost kind of like carrying on his dad's work or something like that. Or he kind of, they're trying to make a thing where it was like psychologically, he kind of followed in his dad's footsteps, even though I think the implication was initially that he started out as an okay dude, but then discovered that he had the same kind of proclivities as his dad, I guess. So what happens in this movie is that there's this apartment building that is owned by Klaus Kinski's character, whose name is Dr. Gunther, Carl Gunther. And at the very beginning of the movie, I mean, it's kind of a slasher movie, I guess, and it's kind of like psychological horror too, but there's not any like surprises. Pretty much from the very opening scene that Dr. Gunther is a murderer, and what he's doing. So there's not really there's not really any suspense over like, oh, who the killer is or is the killer going to get caught or anything like that. It's basically just kind of like a series of escalating set pieces where like, more people, because there's kind of a thing too where he really likes to build these elaborate sort of traps like to kill people, because that's another thing that he does. And so it's kind of like almost kind of like a precursor to Saw, if you want to put it that way. Or I've seen it compared to The Collector as well, which is like kind of a newer film. So it's kind of like the same kind of thing where it's somebody that likes to make traps and things like that. So he has this apartment building, and his big thing is he just likes to rent the rooms out to foxy young ladies. And apparently, because there have been like some foxy young ladies living in this house for presumably a while. So he doesn't kill everybody outright. I think it's only when somebody starts to like twig onto his thing or whatever, because normally what he would do is, I mean, at the very beginning, they show a woman who kind of like hears something in the crawl space, and she kind of goes up into the attic to investigate like what the noise is, because she's been living in this building. And she goes up there and finds up in the attic there is a cage that has a woman in it whose tongue has been cut out. And then there's also kind of like little jars with, you know, with the tongue and with other little body parts and shit. So she's basically like, okay, what's this doing up here? And then Klaus Kinski kind of, you know, sneaks up behind her, like slithers up behind her. It's like, that's a shame, I really liked you. And kills her with this contraption that's kind of like a spear that comes down through the wall or something like that. It's all very elaborate. So as I said, it's no shocker as to like who the killer is. I mean, Klaus Kinski is the murderer in this, and he basically just goes through the movie like killing people. And there's a little bit of conflict with somebody like who's onto him and is trying to like get him busted and all this other stuff. So at the beginning, like after that sort of opening scene, you get this other young woman who is, I think she's like a journalism student or whatever, like at the nearby university, and she's looking for a cheap apartment. So she answers the ad. She's actually played by Talia Balsam, and I think she went on to do a bunch of TV and stuff later on. She might have been in Mad Men later on, I want to say. Pretty much everybody in this had like, you know, decent careers going forward, like all the women in this. So she shows up and gets the apartment building. It's funny because actually a guy shows up at first and is like wants to rent the apartment. But of course, Klaus is like, no, it's already been taken. The guy that shows up is the director, David Schmoller. And I was watching this other like kind of documentary about the making of this movie. And they said that the director and Klaus Kinski did not get along like so badly that they didn't even shoot that scene together. Like, even though it's the director coming up to the door and being like, hey, you know, can I look at this apartment or whatever? So they had to shoot it separate so that Klaus Kinski wouldn't know like who he was interacting with, which I thought was like very, very funny. So essentially, Klaus Kinski's character, as I said, is, you know, the son of a Nazi, and he started out as a doctor, and I guess he lived in Argentina, and I think the implication being, and maybe I'm wrong about this, but I thought the implication was that he was a doctor at first and it was fine, but then he euthanized one of his patients, or he killed one of his patients accidentally or something, and then he sort of like got off on how that made him feel. And so he started doing it just for funsies, like, you know, euthanizing people that he thought were not going to make it or whatever. And then he just kind of like got his jollies from doing that. And then like he started to realize, oh, I'm following in my dad's footsteps, at which point, instead of being like, hey, maybe I should like, you know, tone that back or whatever, he decides he's just going to go all in. So essentially running away to the United States after he kills like 67 people like under his watch in Argentina. So he escapes to the U.S., you know, owns this apartment building, and he rents out the rooms to hot young ladies and then crawls around in the ductwork just watching them, you know what I mean, doing like crazy kind of shit. Now, very weirdly, the first woman that he's watching is this woman who's played by, I guess she's credited in this movie as Tanae. She's actually Tanae McClure, the daughter of Doug McClure, which, you know, who was a very famous actor. He was in like Humanoids from the Deep. He was in like tons of those kind of, not Journey to the Center of the Earth, but those kind of At the Earth's Core, stuff like that. All those kind of movies. So she was actually something of a sort of like a pop star type thing, like in the 80s. I had never, like, she sings a bit in this too and is kind of like a pop star in the movie, like her character is. And I was like, oh, she has a nice voice. She must really be a singer or whatever. And apparently some of her songs were in the first Terminator movie. So if you've seen the first Terminator movie, you've seen some of her songs. She was actually trying to break into acting. It didn't really go all that well. She was in this, and then she was in some kind of like Skinamax type level kind of movies, like some softcore type stuff going forward. But yeah, so she's in this as well. Now there's a very weird scene like at the beginning where she's hanging out in front of her mirror, like being all sexy in her red bra and underwear and everything, and then she like cuts the nipples like out of her bra, and I'm just like, God, do you know how expensive bras are? Jesus Christ, what are you doing? But it turns out, and then like Klaus Kinski is like up in the ductwork like watching her going, oh, this is some good shit. And then but then there's another guy who's outside the bedroom window also looking at her going, oh, this is some good shit. You know what I mean? So but it turns out that the guy lurking outside the window is actually her boyfriend, and this is like some like weird sex game that they play where she gets off on like somebody like quote unquote breaking into her apartment. And, you know, he has a knife on her and stuff, and he's like, oh, this was a nice touch, like cutting the nipples out of the bra and everything. So there was a reason for that. But yeah, so Klaus Kinski's been watching this. So essentially, that's kind of how the movie goes, is that, you know, the new girl comes, she befriends like some of the other young women that live in this place. They're all kind of creeped out by Dr. Gunther, as you would be, because like I said, it's Klaus Kinski. He can't really help but be creepy. He's just a creepy person, and he definitely comes across. And honestly, when I was watching the stuff about like the behind the scenes stuff about this movie, they said like pretty much all the female the actors on this were terrified of him because he was like very clearly unstable. Although it should be said that Tanae McClure, who was in this, she was pretty much the only actor that was able to like calm him down. Like he would behave if she was around. So a lot of times, like a lot of the crew would be like, hey, you know, he's having a meltdown. Can you kind of like come in here and just be around so he'll like chill the fuck out? Apparently that was the only thing that worked on him, was like having her around, and he wouldn't like act up when she was around for whatever reason. So but they were all kind of like scared of him, and it sort of comes across in the movie, but that's probably a good thing, because they're kind of supposed to be afraid of him, because he's supposed to be creepy, he's supposed to be like a psychopath, and you know, these women all live in these apartments like alone with this guy, and he's creeping around in their fucking ductwork. And he does other stuff too, like he has just kind of like little weird shit that he'll do. Like he'll sit in the ductwork and like tap like a knife against like a metal thing, like so it keeps making noise, and like people will be like, what the fuck is that noise? And it's like driving people crazy. And then he has this one like really funny thing in one of the apartments where there's like a little bit of the baseboard, and it's like this little square, and it's like on hinges, so like the little hinge comes up, and then there's like a little gate back there, and then he can open the gate and like let rats into your apartment. So he does that sometimes too. And then there's a later scene where he like fills one of the ladies' fridges full of rats, like live rats. So there's that kind of whole situation. So he's doing little shit like that. But then he also has a prisoner in the attic who, like I said, is a woman whose tongue he cut out, and he didn't kill her because he's like, well, I just needed somebody to talk to. So she just lives in there. So essentially he just sits up in his attic and he writes in his journal. So that's kind of like provides a lot of exposition about like his past and about his dad and about how he feels about things. And so he writes in his thing while she's just kind of sitting there. He also has a white kitten, and you know something bad's gonna happen to the kitten, and indeed it does. Although happily, at least they don't really show it. It's just kind of implied, because as soon as that kitten turned up, I was just like, oh no. You know what I mean? I hate that. It's just making it. It's funny because I don't know. It always bothered me. It bothers me more than people getting fucked up in movies. It's like, I know it's not real, but it's just like, I don't know. It's getting to a point now where, you know, little stuff happening to like cats and dogs in movies, I'm just kind of like, ugh, I just can't even, I don't even like to think about it. But yeah, so something really bad happens to a white kitten in this, but they don't really show it. It's just kind of suggested, and you just kind of see a little bit of the aftermath, but it's not too bad. This is not a real gory film. Yeah, it's kind of like there's a lot of it's just implication, you know what I mean? There's a lot of blood and stuff, but a lot is just implied, and a lot of the people are killed with traps. Now there's this one guy who shows up at Klaus Kinski's apartment, and he's basically like, yeah, a long time ago when you were a doctor in Argentina, one of the people that you killed, one of the 67 people that he killed, was my brother. And so he is like taking it upon himself to find this dude. So he's been looking for him for years and years, and he finally finds him. So he's basically like, look, I can't prove that you did any of this stuff, but I know who you are, and I'm just gonna keep watching you and shit like that. So later on, it will, shock no one to find out that Klaus Kinski is obviously gonna kill this dude, and he does it by making this elaborate, it's like a chair, and then he puts like this, like a spear thing like under the seat, and then it has like kind of buttons that you can't really see like on the arms. So like if you sit in the chair and like put your hand like that, like it's just this spike just goes right up your butt. So that's how that guy ends up dying. And then he carves a swastika in that dude's forehead and then like leaves it in the main character, like the main chick's bathtub. So there's that too. Now, another thing that Klaus Kinski's character does, I keep calling him that. I mean, he's Klaus Kinskiing. He can't, I know his character has a name, but another thing that he does, which I don't know, because I've seen some reviews that said, well, they thought that this made him a little bit more sympathetic. I don't know if it does. I think it just makes him seem like more psychotic. To me, it almost came off like he was like, the reason that he's making all these traps and stuff, I got the feeling that he was almost trying to like absolve responsibility like off of himself for killing people by putting himself at one remove. It's like, oh well, it wasn't me that killed them, it just happened that this guy sat in this elaborately trapped chair that I made, so it's kind of like his own fault. And the thing like where the trap where the little white kitten gets killed, it's just kind of like this trap, and she's like, oh well, they don't say this in the movie, but it's almost kind of like, oh well, the cat shouldn't have crawled in there, so it's like the cat's own fault. So I kind of feel like there was that, because one thing that he does after each person that he kills in the apartment building is he cuts his finger and puts blood on a bullet, and then he puts the bullet in the revolver or whatever and then spins it, and he does like Russian roulette. And so he'll hold it to his head, and if it doesn't go, and obviously it doesn't shoot him, then he says, so be it. So I guess he's saying, well, I kind of feel like he's saying, well, if God didn't want me to do this, or fate didn't want me to do this, then the gun would go off and I would die, and he's perfectly happy with that. But because it didn't happen, that must mean, oh, well, I'm okay and I can continue what I'm doing. And also, like I said, that's also kind of like a little bit of letting fate decide his outcome, I guess. So as the movie goes on, he gets like more and more deranged. At one point he's just like watching all these like Nazi propaganda films and like putting makeup on and like smearing lipstick all over his face, and it's putting the hat on and saying he's his own judge, jury, and executioner and all this other kind of crazy shit. So it's just like this crazy, like I said, it's very straightforward, the story. There's no twists and turns, there's no surprises or anything like that. You pretty much know how it's gonna go. But honestly, I mean, Klaus Kinski in this is just so, it really gives something to this movie that it absolutely would not have had without him in it. I think it would have been an okay movie without him, but it would have just been like okay. It wouldn't have been like all that memorable. Him being in it really elevates this one to kind of something special. I also really like the apartment house set that they designed. It's really nice. And I like that the entire movie is shot inside the apartment building. There is one shot that's outside, like outside the window, and that was also shot inside, like on a soundstage. So the movie has like this real claustrophobic type of vibe to it, which I think works really well. So let me talk a little bit about one of the things that came out of this movie that's that's definitely more popular than the movie itself. There was a 9-minute documentary film that the director David Schmoller made several years later. I think it was in 1999. And it's called Please Kill Mr. Kinski. The reason that it's called that is because when he was working on this movie, like I said, David Schmoller, he was very excited to work with Klaus Kinski and hadn't heard like what a pain in the ass he was. So he's like, literally the first day the guy shows up on set, he didn't like any of the clothes that had been picked out for him, like for the wardrobe. So he was like, fuck this, I'm not wearing any of this. He goes out to like these really expensive like clothing restaurants, buys a whole entire new wardrobe of clothes he liked, charged it to the production, like the production company, the movie. And then when the production was over, he took all the clothes home. So, I mean, just right out the gate, they said in the first 48 hours of this shoot, he had started literally 6 fistfights, like, on the set. People were threatening to quit. It was just kind of like, and he was doing shit. I mean, he'd always be late. He just like screamed and cried. He didn't want to do anything. And it was just kind of like, after a while, because David Schmoller, like after the first few days of the production, he's like, what the fuck is up with this guy? Like, he's a psychopath. And then he started going back and like reading some interviews with him. And he's basically, Klaus Kinski hated directors. He really did not like being told what to do. He didn't like being told what his craft was. He thought directors were shit. They didn't know what they were doing. And only he could direct Klaus Kinski. You know what I mean? So he would get to a point where, you know, like on the set of this movie, he would get mad, like the director would go action like a normal director would, and he would start like flipping out. No, all my whole entire career, it's like all these directors are shouting action at me, and I should decide like when I'm ready and all this other kind of stuff. So they had to like make all these concessions to him because, and he was just completely unreasonable. They said just all the demands he made were completely unreasonable. You couldn't like tell him anything. They basically had to film him pretty much all the time because he just would not be managed. They said, you can't say action, you can't say cut. He's like, I'll decide when the scene's over. He wouldn't read a lot of the dialogue that was in the take. He's like, I don't need to say it. He would say stuff like that. So they said after a while, like the director, he was like, I basically had to start using like reverse psychology on him, where we would do a scene and I'd be like, oh, we don't need any of that dialogue. And just to be spiteful, he would be like, oh, well, I'm going to do the dialogue then. He's like, well, that's good because that's what I wanted anyway. So they really had to, he got the feeling that like Klaus Kinski was just being a dick on purpose because he hated directors and he wanted directors to quit. And so I kind of feel like David Schmoller was like, well, I'm just not going to let him get to me like that. So he just kind of started to like, so they basically all had to like work around him and like manage what like his behavior, which by all accounts, I mean, was atrocious. It was so bad that one of the producers, who, it's funny because in the documentary that David Schmoller made, Please Kill Mr. Kinski, he doesn't name the guy. He says the Italian producer, but since it was only one Italian producer like on this, everybody knows who he's talking about. They said that guy said, allegedly, that after a few days of putting up with Kinski's shenanigans on set, the producer was basically like, how about we just have him killed and collect the insurance money? At which point, I mean, because they wanted to fire him after a few days because they said, this is just not worth it. But the production company, I think it was Vestron Pictures and Empire and some like the financiers were like, no, you can't fire him because he's like the bankable name. This movie's not going to go anywhere unless he's in it. So you have to have him in the movie. So at that point, they just had to like figure out, essentially, like I said, how to work around him. But after that, producer, like early on, was just kind of like, maybe we could kill him for the insurance money, and the director's like calling the other producers being like, he says that we should kill him and he's totally serious. And they're like, no, you can't do that, obviously. But by the end of the shoot, pretty much everybody on the crew was basically and they said that they would just say it like right in front of Klaus Kinski's face too. They would just go to the director and be like, please kill him, because like everyone was just over his fucking shit. Now apparently like all of his antics made the movie go like 2 weeks over, which is kind of a big deal for a lower, I mean, it's not that big a deal, I guess, for like a big production, but for something as low budget as this, that's a pretty big deal that it went 2 weeks over, just because he was being such a pain and he just wouldn't do 2 takes. He would, he was just like a nightmare to work with, and every single person said that, and pretty much everybody, by the end of the shoot, every single person on the cast and crew wanted him dead. So and like I said, that's not the only movie he worked on where people were like actively threatened. In fact, Klaus Kinski was so aware of how everybody hated him on this set that the scenes where he was doing the Russian roulette, he started getting paranoid that somebody was actually going to put real bullets in that shit, so he would actually blow his own head off, like, during the filming. So he would, like, keep checking it and keep checking it and keep checking it, like, before they did the scene. So on some level, he must have known, like, what a fucking monster he was, because he knew that people were, like, out to get him. But it seems like, I don't know, it seems like rightfully so, like, people were out to get him. And it's just kind of like, I don't know, it's kind of funny because, I mean, it's funny in retrospect because he was a brilliant actor, and he's actually really good in this. He's super, super creepy, which is what you want, like, for an ex-Nazi murderer he makes traps to kill people and, like, leers at people through their crawl space. So it's always good, like, if you're creepy for that. But it just, he's such a brilliant actor, and he got away with a lot. But I mean, it's funny if you weren't there, but I'm sure if you were, like, working on the movie, it must have just been fucking hell. I mean, you just wouldn't want to go to, can you imagine, like, having to work with somebody like that every day? So in a way, it's like, it's funny, but then I'm thinking, well, that's really shitty though, because you're making life, 100 times more difficult for everyone around you just because of your massive ego and because think you know better than everybody. So I don't know. Was it worth it? Probably, because as I said, if Klaus Kinski wasn't in this movie, it probably would have been completely forgotten. But honestly, though, I kind of feel like this movie, it's not completely forgotten, but it's largely forgotten because, as I said, if he wasn't in it, it just seemed like nobody would talk about it at all, because there's not, it's not like super creative or anything like that. I think it did okay at the box office. I don't know, like, it didn't lose money, but it got kind of bad reviews, and everybody just said it was just kind of a big nothing kind of movie. But it's, or if it was just, like, really ugly, really disturbed, and it wasn't, it just wasn't a good time, which I kind of agree with that. It is kind of disturbing, but not by today's standards. I think it's pretty tame. But honestly, and like I said, I will agree, though, that hearing all the stories about Klaus Kinski, about the fucking shit he was doing behind the scenes and, like, all the trouble that they went to getting this movie made, was probably more entertaining than the movie. I do like the movie, though. I think it has, like, a lot of really cool cinematography. I really like the apartment set, like how claustrophobic it was. I think actually the cinematographer on this was might have been Sergio Salvatio, I think, who worked with Lucio Fulci quite a bit. I think he did The Beyond and a couple of his other ones. So there's that. So you had a lot of talent going on behind the camera, but it's funny how much it got, like, kind of overshadowed by what a fucking nutcase Klaus Kinski is. He just, wherever he went, he just kind of just psychoed the fuck out, and that's what everybody remembers. This is definitely worth watching, though, if for nothing else, for his, like, fucking creepy ass performance and just the crazy, like, traps that he comes up with. There is, like, something really skeezy about this movie, in the sense that it kind of makes you want to wash afterward. It's kind of that sort of, it's kind of, I don't want to say it's like sleazy, but it does have a little bit of that sleaze to it. And it is very, very 80s. Like, everyone has very, very 80s hair, very, very 80s clothing. It's just like an 80s explosion. So I think it's a good thing to watch for that as well. I think I don't remember that much about it from seeing it the first time, but I'm actually glad I rewatched it and, like, learned about all the behind the scenes shit, because that was just hilarious. And honestly, I'm actually flabbergasted that all of the shit that went on behind the scenes of this, I'm amazed that a movie this decent came out of that clusterfuck, because you just would have, and a fairly successful movie. Like I said, I think it didn't lose money, but I think it did okay. I think it didn't do all that great. It didn't get good critical reviews. And again, it's one that a lot of people don't really seem to remember from the 80s. For whatever reason, I saw it a couple times back on cable, like I said, and I didn't really remember a lot about it, but something about it must have resonated from all those years ago, because when it came up again, like when I was scrolling through on Tubi, and I was like, oh yeah, I remember that one. I really need to see that again. So, I'll watch anything with Klaus Kinski in it because, like I said, he's a fucking psychopath. But yeah, this is on Tubi for free at the moment, at least as of this recording. So please go check it out and tell me what you think about it. And let's have a discussion about what a fucking nightmare Klaus Kinski was, because... yeah, I think we talked about him a little bit when we talked about Nosferatu, because he was in that as well, and was also super, super creepy in that. Like I said, he couldn't help but be creepy. He was just like a creepy dude. But yes, this is kind of an interesting sort of quasi slasher from the 80s that doesn't really get talked about a lot. So I'm kind of curious as to who's seen it, or if you haven't seen it. If you have seen it, let me know in the comments. And that will do it for this Flickers of Fear. I will see you guys on the next one. Bye.